Okie dokie, I think we'll get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your workday to attend this webinar. We're very excited today to have Sara الهنائي with us. It's one of the topics that has been requested by a lot of our Aish community to really kind of understand how to navigate the legal landscape for startups. So for those of you that don't know and are new to our webinar, Harsh is the abbreviation for Oman Startup Hub. It is the platform to connect, discover, and learn about the Omani startup ecosystem. If you're a startup, a supporter, an advisor, you want to know about news or events that are happening in the Omani ecosystem, then Harsh is the place for you. If you're not already on there, we do encourage you to register. If not, just explore the website, follow us on social media so that you know about great webinars like this and other events that are happening in the ecosystem. So I won't take up too much of your time. I'm going to hand it over to Sara. Sara is a lawyer at CMS, and she is going to talk to us today about everything you need to know about legal processes for startups.
Thank you, Sara. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to do this. I wanted to tell you a bit about myself before I get started. I'm a lawyer at CMS, as Sara Lamki mentioned. I have been working with CMS for around 5 years now. I trained with them in London and Dubai, as well as Muscat, and now I'm in the corporate team here in Muscat. Today, I'm going to talk to you a bit about our firm and our EQUIP program, which is special for SMEs here in Oman. And then I'm going to go through some of the options you have for legal structures for your tech startup, followed by employment contract and labor law considerations. And then finally, I'll close with a bit about privacy policies and things to consider when you are drafting that. And after my presentation, we can go through your questions together. Sorry, Sara, do you mind starting the slides?
Yep, I'm just about to do that.
Okay. Okay, so a bit about CMS. If you can go to the third slide, please, Sara. Okay, so a bit about CMS. I can't see the slides, but I can tell you a bit about us. We have over 4,800 lawyers, and 1,100 of them are partners. We've been in Oman for since 2014, I think, and we are also operating in 70 other cities across 43 countries. We are the 5th biggest law firm in the world. So as you can see, we're not really a startup, but what we also have is 150 lawyers on ground in the Middle East with a full service offering of everything from corporate commercial M&A to telecom, media, and tech advice, as well as disputes, employment, energy projects, construction, everything. We cover everything in Oman and the Middle East. In terms of our TMT advice, we can offer in Oman, we cover everything from technology, media, IP, franchising, distribution, data protection and privacy, communication, as well as advertising and marketing. We have, sorry, Sara, can you go to the next slide as well? If you can look in the slide, you can see our different offices and where they are. In the Middle East, we have offices in Dubai, as well as Istanbul, Muscat, Riyadh, and Tehran. We also have a new office in Abu Dhabi. This is a bit more about our Middle East offices. Thank you. If we can go on to the next slide about CMS EQUIP. We are very excited about this new program we have. We just launched in Oman, and I think it was less than a week ago, actually. We are offering startups discounted rates of 50% on our hourly rates for a period of 3 years. We are also offering you introductions to the relevant industry players when possible, as well as added value, so you can get access to office space with us when you need it, for example, or if you need to be introduced to fellow entrepreneurs, we can help you with that. And if you sign up with us in our CMS Equip program here, you can benefit from the same terms and conditions across different jurisdictions as well. Okay, now we can get started on what kind of structures you should think about when you're setting up your business in Oman. You have two options, ideally, as a startup. It's either a single shareholder or a limited liability company. A single shareholder is also known as a sole proprietor company. It's a new structure under the Commercial Companies Law where one shareholder can set up a company but with limited liability, as opposed to what used to be a sole trader, which was an option we had under the previous law where you could set up your company as a sole trader and your liability would not be limited. So if, for example, you're sued, someone can go after your personal money as well as whatever you put into the business. But this option is only available to Omani and GCC entities. And each individual is only allowed one single shareholder company. There's no minimum share capital requirement, which is a great option which makes it a great option for startups. And the documentation you need to set it up is very minimal. So you would need just a constitutive contract and an application form for setting up the company with the Ministry of Commerce. This makes it relatively quick to set up and the fees are minimal. Okay, onto LLCs. There are no nationality requirements for this anymore, except for a few business activities which are set out by MOKI. In order to set up an LLC, you would need at least 2 shareholders and no more than 50 shareholders. But you have to keep in mind minority shareholder rights when you're thinking about how many shareholders you would put in your company. You also have no minimum share capital requirements if all your shareholders are Omani, but if there's a foreign shareholder involved, then it's 150,000 Omani riyals needed, which you would need to prove 1 year after setting up your company. This type of company is a little bit more document heavy, mainly because there's more than one shareholder, so you would have to think about how you can govern the relationship between you and the other shareholders in the company, and what the voting rights for each type of decision would entail. It's also a bit more costly to set up, but it's also relatively quick compared to, for example, an SAOC. In terms of business partners, you need to think about how you would be represented as well on the day-to-day running of the business. For example, you can each appoint a manager to help represent you in the business, and you can actually amend the profits and loss distribution to suit, for example, if you have a silent shareholder, you would give them a certain amount of profit from the company, but you'd also minimize their decision-making powers in the company. These are things you have to think about if you're setting up an LLC. Okay, if we go on to the next slide, there are also IP considerations. Let's say, for example, you have an innovative idea and you want it to be registered properly so that anyone who uses you would benefit from anyone using your idea. For that, you would need to register your IP with the Ministry of Commerce. And then you also have to consider what type of business activities you'll be running. Depending on what they are, you may require licenses. for that, and that might take a bit of time to obtain. So there might be possible delays from this. If we go on to the next slide, we would have to think about employment contract. As a seed funding startup, the first thing you'd have to think about is employment contract. And in that, because you'll be hiring new people to help you with your business. So when you're doing that, you need to take into consideration what kind of information you need to put in your employment contract. This would include the names of the employee and the employer, a job description, the date of birth of the employee, their qualifications, their place of birth, the nationality of the employee, their entitlements in terms of annual leave, maternity leave, sick leave, and then also the duration of their employment, which whether it's automatically renewable or not, or if it's just a fixed term for a certain period, their salary and the breakdown of that salary, which would include travel allowances, the basic salary, living allowances, and whatever else you want to include. And just to note, you would have to give the employee an original copy and keep one for yourself. Other things to consider are immunization rates when you're hiring. This actually depends on the size and activity of the company. So there's no list of exactly how much, what rate you have to meet. You would have to consider how you register each employee under which activity. And if you don't meet the requirements that the Ministry of Labor give you for immunization, you might face penalties or fines. But if you do meet them, you can actually get a benefit from preferential treatments with the Ministry of Labor. And then other labor considerations is that you'd have to keep in mind that employees are not to be asked to work for more than 45 hours per week or 9 hours a day. But obviously, if they choose to do so, they can at their free will. And then you would have to register your employees with the Ministry of Labor and think about the PASI payments that you'd have to make, which is for Omani employees only. It's at 11.5% of the gross salary, and 7% is to be paid by the employee themselves. And then there's also recently, we have job security funds, which you would have to pay to the Ministry of Labor, which is at 1%. And end of service gratuity payments for non-Omani employees. For example, let's say you have a non-Omani employee for working with you for 3 years, then you would have to, when they leave your company, you'd have to pay them 15 days worth of their basic salary for every year they've spent with you. But if it's more than 3 years, after those 3 years, you'd have to pay them 1 month's worth of salary for every year. These are things you have to consider because it actually adds up at the end. So it's something you should think about at an early stage in your business. Okay, on to the last topic, which is privacy policies. Basically, apps and websites that that tech companies will need inevitably process personal data about people. And to process this kind of information, you need to make sure that you're actually in compliance with the law. There's no specific law for how you process information about other people, but under the Electronic Transaction Law of 2008, you are not allowed to collect any information about a person without obtaining express consent from that person. So what you would need is a privacy policy as a legal document and get the consent from a person, for example, visiting your website or downloading your app. This would include information about how you'll manage their data, the type of information that you will be collecting on your website or app, the purpose for your collection of that data, and how you will be storing it and accessing it, whether others will be accessing it, and how you would transfer it, and whether you have cookies on your site. Okay, so this covers all the basic topics that we need to know. But if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you, Sara. If you have any questions, then please, there is a chat box at the bottom of the screen. And also we've had some questions during registration, so we're just going to go through some of those as well. Thank you. Some questions are already coming in, which is great. One of the questions that came in earlier by people signing up was about tax. Can you talk a little bit about tax implications of the new taxes that are going to be implementable or enforceable in a few months for startups?
Okay, well, there's only so much I can say about tax because it's better to go to an accountant for this. But what we do know is that there are, for VAT now, there are different categories of businesses based on the turnover of that business. And if you have an annual turnover of 38,500 to 250,000, you are categorized as a category D business. And at that point, you're given leniency to not register for VAT until a later stage in April 2022. If your business is smaller than 38,000 and a bit bigger than 19,250 turnover, then you actually have an option to voluntarily register, but you're not required to. So you can see that startups are actually given a bit of leeway when it comes to tax in Oman.
Great. One of the other questions that had come in earlier was about international setup. So if you're an Omani company or Omani startup, what are the pros and cons of setting up internationally, and what kind of legality do you have to think about?
Okay, well, if in terms of international setup as a foreign company setup in Oman, you would have to think about who you're partnering with, I guess. Mainly what you would want from a foreign partner is either money, knowledge, or experience. And if you can benefit from those things, I would say it's a good idea, of course, because the Omani law is actually encouraging companies from other countries to come in and invest here so that we can diverse away from oil and gas. So this is actually made easy in Oman. So
great. What about trying to navigate legal laws or tech laws, things related to startups? Is there any kind of resource that companies can use, or do you have to go through a lawyer? Because we all know that fees for lawyers can be expensive.
Well, that's actually why we started the CMS Equip program, because we know that legal fees are the last thing on your mind as a startup, and you just don't want to be burdened with them. So obviously we have some of the biggest tech companies in the world, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, coming to us for legal advice, and we wanted to use that knowledge and experience to help smaller businesses for a more reasonable price, which is why we set up the CMS Equip program. But I would also say that it's a good idea to come to a lawyer at an earlier stage so that you can avoid it when there is a problem and it's almost too late to do anything about it.
Do you have any templates for contracts that are easily accessible, or would that be part of your services as part of the Equip? Because we have a question here about contracts, especially employment contracts.
We definitely have with us at our CMS Equip program, we can offer templates for privacy policies, terms and conditions, employment contracts, constitutive contracts, shareholder agreements, everything you would need to set up. We have to offer as a template. So yes, we do. And we also have a Law Now website where we occasionally put articles giving advice to anyone who's interested in reading, actually, regarding Omani law, which you can see. It doesn't actually have a template in it, but it gives you an idea of what you need to include in your different kinds of contracts.
How do you know if you qualify for the CMS Equip? Do you have certain criteria?
That's completely discretionary, but we offer it to anyone who is at an early stage of their business. So we're not very strict. We're not judges here. So.
That's good to hear, I'm sure, for a lot of our listeners right now. Is there any approval that you need to have an app? If you're already registered with MOSI, the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, then are there any other approvals that you need to launch a website or an app?
Not necessarily, but it actually depends on the content of your website. It's more about getting your license for carrying out the activity than launching the website itself. That requires approvals from different ministries.
Can you give us a little bit more detail about that? How could we know, how could our listeners know more about that?
Okay, so there is actually a list of activities on the MOKI website where you can see which what you can do that doesn't require a license. But let's say, for example, you are involved in something medical related, you might need to go to the Ministry of Health to obtain a license for that specific activity. And then it's not necessarily about the website that requires the approval, but it's the setting up the business part that does.
So if you're already set up, then under that you can probably, unless it's very specific to a specific ministry, you can have your app and your website and everything else.
Yes, basically what you have is a CR, a commercial registration document. Once you set up your company, and then you have different activities listed out in that. And until you obtain the license, if there is a license needed, it will be listed as pending. And then once you've had it approved, you will officially be licensed to carry out that activity, and you can do whatever you need to.
Great, that's very helpful. There's a question on having different share classes. How does a startup register their share classes locally? Like some startups are setting up at ADGM or BVI, Jersey. How can you do the share classes locally?
That's a good question, actually, but this is something you can cover in your shareholders agreement, what the different share classes entail. I would say that it's actually governed by the commercial companies law as well, but if you want to fully protect your rights as a shareholder, it's better to have a shareholders agreement in place to completely define what you can and cannot do at certain share classes.
Okay, I think that makes sense. But if you do have, because this came from one of the listeners, if you do have follow-up questions, please do type them in the Q&A box. Can you please elaborate more on the non-Omani shareholder capitalism and requirements for setting up the company for activities related to IT and tech in general?
Okay, so fortunately for tech-related activities, there doesn't so far seem to be any restrictions for foreign companies investing here in Oman. But the only holdback, I would say, compared to having a fully Omani company is that there's still a minimum share capital requirement of 150,000 compared to 0 being the minimum share capital requirement for a fully Omani owned company. I would also say that you might also benefit from their knowledge and experience, but you would have to also keep in mind that you would be sharing your control over that company with another entity.
Is there any approval to be obtained to get freelancers to work for your startup, especially if it's SaaS, software as a service? Do you need any special approval to get freelancers to work on that?
Yes, you need to apply with MOKI for something like that. I'm not sure who asked this question, but if you email me separately, I can send you the details of what's required.
Great, yeah, we will get all the contact details and be sure to share it at the end of the session. And we will also send out an email with the YouTube link and the summary of this webinar. So we'll make sure to include your contact details there as well.
Okay, thank you.
There's some more questions about registering IP. Can you talk a little bit more about IP laws in Oman?
Okay, so the IP laws in Oman are relatively vague, but you would need to register with the Ministry of Commerce and Industry and Investment Promotion for this. Depending on your idea, it's actually a very lengthy process, especially with patents. But it actually depends on the type of IP registration you have. Is the person who asked this question able to specify what kind of IP rights they're referring to, or what they're trying to protect?
Selmeen, if you're listening, then can you ask a little bit more specifically what you're looking for? Otherwise, of course, like Sarah said, she's available by email, but I'm sure it would be useful for everyone. IP is a question that we're asked a lot. Like you said, it's a bit of a vague kind of area. So he's just wondering generally kind of about IP.
It is obviously a good idea for you to protect your IP rights. And it's a lengthy process, but it all depends on the type of IP right that you choose to register.
Is there any specific one that's more challenging than others?
I would have to say patents, but yes, I would have to say patents are the most difficult almost everywhere in the world.
Good to know. We also have some questions about, you talked a little bit about the LLC, but what other kinds of conditions? So you mentioned that if you're solely Omani, then there's no minimum. If you're international, there's a minimum. But do you have any more details about setting up an LLC?
Yes, depending on who the two or more shareholders will be, let's say they are corporate entities, they would need those corporate entities to approve the setup of this LLC in Oman. And for example, if it is a foreign shareholder that decided to set up the company in Oman, they would have to get all their documents legalized and attested wherever they get them signed and then brought to Oman, the original copies, like for example, board resolutions or shareholder resolutions. And then you would also need, if it's an individual who's setting up the company, you would need like passport copies of those people and a certificate of good standing or equivalent for an individual. You will need to draft a constitutive contract to govern how your company is going to be run in Oman. This is going to be registered with the ministry. And you might also choose to have a shareholders agreement in place to privately govern how your relationship with other shareholders, which is similar to what the constitutive contract will have, but it won't be registered with the ministry. So it gives you a bit more freedom to put whatever you want and not necessarily stick to whatever is needed for approval in the ministry.
We have a couple more questions on tax. I know you said speak to an accountant as well, but let's see if you can answer these. If you're a 100% foreign invested company in Oman, what kind of corporate tax is there?
Okay, so from my understanding from the laws that corporate tax is around 15% for all companies, but really I would advise that you go to a tax consultant instead.
Okay, there's one last tech question is that if there's any tax on funding raised for startups, if you know anything.
Yes. I think I mentioned this before, that they're given less strict requirements and they can register at a later date.
So to Vikrant, who's asking a few questions about tax, please do reach out to a tax professional, but also Sarah will be available to see if there's any way she can help. And if there's anyone you know specifically, Sarah, that they should reach out to, then I think that would be useful as well.
Okay, I can help with that.
Is there any financial institution other than the central bank that provides licenses and registration for fintech startups?
Okay, well, the central bank is the main one in Oman, and actually, if you are let's say, some things are not governed by, like Bitcoin, for example, it's not governed in Oman by the central bank, but they do not advise. The central bank has a few statements saying that they don't advise people in Oman to invest in Bitcoin. But no, I would just say the only one and the main one is the central bank.
What happens if an LLC fails to prove the minimum capital of 150,000 after the first year?
They can be penalized, and eventually it will be blocked from carrying out its activities, and you wouldn't be able to renew your commercial license, which you're required to do regularly. And possibly a wind up. Yes.
Okay. So make sure you have it at the end of the first year. At what point should a founder seek legal advice? I think you mentioned the earlier the better. But at what stage of the startup cycle? So at the idea stage, kind of, it's a long journey, startups. So at what stage do you think a lawyer should get involved?
I'd say ideally not at the pre-seed funding stage, but at the seed funding stage, when you have already established what you want from your company. You have a concept, a design, and you've developed it, and you're ready to launch. So, and you're at the stage where you're going to need help from new hires, and you are setting up officially as a company. That for me is the ideal stage to come to legal advice.
Do you know if the incubators and accelerators here, like OTF and SAS, should you have already had your legal kind of advice, your legal documents and everything set, or would they be able to help with that as well?
We generally do have templates for most legal documents, but we obviously tweak them to cater to whoever we are dealing with and whatever is needed in that certain situation.
So if you're looking for funding from one of these seed programs, like OTF
yes.
seed program, should the startup have already spoken to you, or should it be after that?
Ideally, we would say before you sign anything, you should go to a lawyer.
Okay. That's good to know. So really get it right at the beginning when you're at the seed stage as much as possible. Get all your information there.
Yes.
As part of the equip or otherwise, do you offer one-on-one sessions?
Yes, actually, I'm a member of Hush, so I do offer, and I'm available on the phone as well for some free legal advice through the Hush membership.
Sara is very kindly an advisor on Hush, and like she said, she'll offer free kind of advisory sessions. So if you are not on Hush, then it's a good chance to register, check the list of advisors, and you can contact Sara directly from the platform. Legal fees, there's a question about legal fees. It's usually perceived as expensive. You did say that there's a 50% discount, but do you know the average kind of cost that they could expect?
That's actually something we can send to you separately if it's okay. Sorry, who asked the question, and I can email them.
It's an anonymous person.
Okay, if you want me to send you our fee code separately, I can do that, because it all depends on the kind of advice you need and the other factors as well. But it's significantly lower, and we are one of the leading law firms in the world, so it's a very good offer, I would say.
Great, yeah. I'm sure that a lot of people will be reaching out to you after this session. Okay. Other than, some of the law firms that we know of here have blogs that kind of give updates on the different laws that are arising and the different changes in the rules. How do you recommend that companies keep up with that? Just kind of general knowledge on legal proceedings, other than speaking to their lawyer all the time.
That is actually basically free advice or free articles on interesting legal topics we have on CMS Law Now. I guess a good way to keep up with the legal changes or relevant legal changes is by subscribing to these kind of websites and reading up on it.
Is there any you recommend in particular? You mentioned CMS Law Now, so that's the CMS one. Is that the global information, or is that localized?
We have an Oman page, but there's also for whatever other jurisdiction you're interested in. We also have a Middle East specific one.
Great, that's good to know. There's one question. You did mention that MOSI has a list of the specific activities that require licenses. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, and also where specifically to find the list of activities?
It's actually very easy to find. On the MOKI website is very easy to navigate. If you go on, I can send you the list separately by email, but if you go on I think it's under the frequently asked questions section, they have a table that sets out activities that do not require licenses. And then they also have a list of all the different kinds of activities, and each one has a specific code. So when you do set up your company, you would have to apply for whatever activity you want using that number, the code, and they will tell you then and there that you require approval from Ministry X for this activity to be run. And until then, it will stay as pending on your page.
So this is during the registration process on the website?
Yes, or at any other stage where you choose to add an activity or remove one.
And that's through the Invest Easy website, correct?
Exactly.
Okay, great. I mean, it's really useful. A lot of the companies that we speak to are at the idea stage, really starting to gain traction, but it's even the simplest of steps to set up a company is not always very obvious. So even kind of the more basic information would be useful. So thank you for that.
No worries.
There was another question about directories. What kind of directories are available? So we know that CMS obviously has the equip, but is there a way to find different services for different startups, directories for the differently? So for example, you mentioned tax, speak to a tax person, IP, patents, all the different services that you would need. Is there a directory that would be easy to navigate?
I think if you start by going to one advisor, they can tell you what other kinds of advisors you need at that stage, depending on what is required. So obviously the tax consultant and accountants might be needed at a later stage. Legal advisors there are. Maybe marketing, you might need some advice with that as well.
So it's important to get good advisors for your company to make sure that you can navigate.
I would say, especially as a tech startup, you would need a lot of help from marketing to put together, for example, your website or your app.
Can you talk a little bit more about the difference between tech startups legally and kind of brick and mortar companies?
I mean, the difficulty in Oman with this is that the concept is relatively new, so there isn't a lot of legal support to govern how you run a tech startup. But we do have the electronic transactions law, which helps, for example, as I mentioned, with what you need to do when it comes to collecting data from a customer or a client with the privacy policy. I think that there's a lot of it. Most of the issues that you would come across is how you use the information you collect as a tech company. And that's the most crucial thing.
You mentioned that as part of the equip, there are templates that you have available, but
Yes.
there are people asking about if you search like online, mostly they're for other jurisdictions, for other countries. Is there any free and easy templates that you can find easily other than coming through the equip?
We have our own templates at CMS, so I don't really use the ones online because we actually, I don't know, we don't want to use something that is not tailored to our clients. From our experience, we find that it's better to build on what we've already seen has worked, rather than just use anything online. But I'm not sure if there's anything specific to Oman for templates on the internet. I know that there is a website, Lexis Middle East, that offers some legal advice and puts up laws in English and Arabic, for example, but I don't think they have many templates yet.
That's good to know as well. Lexis Middle East, right?
Yes.
Great. Can you elaborate a bit more about LLC versus SPC, so single shareholder versus an LLC in terms of liability?
Okay, well, they're both limited liability companies. The difference is that an SPC is a single shareholder, so you alone would be or your company would be the only shareholder in that company, whereas LLC would have 2 to 50 shareholders. The difference is mainly in the decision-making process. I would say it's obviously quicker with an SPC because it's just you or your company deciding to pass a resolution to make a decision, whereas with an LLC, you would have to come to an agreement with several different shareholders before you actually do pass a resolution to enter into a contract with another company, for example, or to increase your capital, whatever it is that you're doing. Another difference is with the management of the company, it's also quicker to manage a single shareholder company in terms of decision making, but it might also be quicker with an LLC in a sense that you have support from other shareholders who may or may not have more experience to offer, or maybe you have the experience to offer to them to help them come to the correct decision. In terms of the documents, the difference is mainly that you would probably have to enter into a more detailed constitutive contract with an LLC to govern how you're running your business than you would with a single shareholder company, mainly because, again, there's more than one shareholder that you need to take into consideration whenever you decide on anything in the company. And I think those are the main issues.
That makes sense. I think that answers the question. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience working with startups? Are there any kind of stories you have to share, either here or in the UK or in Dubai? Anything interesting, any warning kind of signs or good practices that you've experienced?
I've worked in Dubai with a few startups where I've had to draft privacy policies for them, and I would say that sometimes the other, like let's say the client gives you their template and asks you to update it. I would say don't just rely on a template. You'd have to look into it to see how it fits your exact company. From my experience, I've seen that that's important. It's also interesting to see that everything we do here on the side of the world is always in Arabic and in English, even with websites. So it's like twice the work you have to do. And then it's not very different than working with a big tech company in terms of what's needed for legal advice. It's just that you need it at an earlier stage.
As part of the Equip, is it more an ad hoc kind of service, or do you recommend startups have a longer kind of engagement with you for their whole startup journey? Or is it more like I need this now at different stages of the company formation?
Okay, so how the Equip program works is that we offer you the discount for a period of 3 years. And then whatever you need, we will apply that discount to. So as and when you need it, depending on what is required, I would say it's a good idea to do that instead of just, I don't know, signing a retainer for a fixed amount at an early stage, and maybe you won't need advice on something and you're just paying for no reason.
Is there a maximum number of startups that you can take?
No, I don't think so.
And you've
because
just
we are
correct? Newly launched.
sorry.
Newly launched in Oman.
Yes, that's true. But also because we have an international and global reach, we don't have a limit. So we can help you like as many as we can take, I would say.
Would you also be able to help as part of the equip through your different offices expansion, the legal kind of requirements for moving from one country or expanding from Oman to another country?
Yeah, we could actually. That's one of the benefits of working with CMS. We have offices nearly everywhere in the world. So when you do sign up for the equip program, you could benefit from it in different countries as well, because the equip program actually exists in a lot of other jurisdictions, which I can share a list of with you if you're interested.
No, that's great. I think it's really helpful for startups who are thinking of at the growth stage how to expand further. So if you have that kind of continuity, I think that would be really useful.
Okay, sure.
So I think we're getting up to 1 hour. If there are no other questions, we'll start to wrap up. Sara, was there any last words that you wanted to share?
No, I think that's everything. Thank you everyone for your time. I hope you enjoyed my presentation.
Well, thank you, everyone. We will definitely be sharing Sara's contact details by email. As she mentioned, she's also an advisor on Rush. So if you're a member, you can also contact her through the platform. It's amanstartuphub.com, in case you don't know. And follow us on social media. We do have some more webinars planned for the year. We also have some new activities, new features coming up. So do stay in touch with the Rush team. Do follow us on social media. And if you need anything from either the Rush team or any of the speakers on our webinars, you can always reach out to us by email. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.
Bye.